Welcome to the Wordy Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello and happy Saturday, everybody. This is the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And today we're going to be talking about something which is a bit of a, I guess I'd call it a trope these days, where there's
everything is a trope at this point. You would be amazed at the things that people look at and say, "Oh, I'm tired of that. It's a trope," and it's like something that's almost impossible to remove from a story.
Yeah. Well, so just to... like, what's happening a lot these days is that a lot of old franchises are getting handed over to new people. And invariably what these new people seem to want to do is turn, like, the good guys from the old version into bad guys in the new version. At least that seems to be a pretty significant trend these days. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I actually did not realize that was the direction you were going with this topic. I thought that when you said we were going to talk about former good guys... I read it completely backwards, like, every time we talked about it. I was thinking former bad guys turning good, and somehow my brain said, nope, we're going to give you concept dyslexia here.
Oh.
Because I thought you were talking about bad guys becoming good guys vis-a-vis, or...
I literally wrote, quote, make the former good guys evil, end quote, trope.
Yes, and in my head, the first thing I thought was Vegeta becoming a good guy in Dragon Ball Z. So I read it completely the opposite.
Okay, interesting. Well...
but yes, this is...
which way do we want to go with this? I'm actually keen to go either way.
We can do both.
All right, we can do both.
Because when you said that, I was like, oh crap, how am I not going to bring up the good guy on this one?
Uh-huh.
For obvious reasons, but... since I've already done that, we'll skip over all that. We don't have to talk about that. Now,
I'll just cut that out.
Yeah, we'll just cut all of that out. The whole trope thing, though, just before we dive into it.
Sure.
It has gotten so bad with the way some people discuss this stuff that it's almost like people have gotten to the level of saying, "Oh, it's a trope that there's people in the story." Like,
yeah.
What do you mean? It's like, of course, there's going to be common things that happen in stories.
Trees? How cliche.
Right? This story was written using words. What a trope.
Next you're going to call this collection of trees a grove or a forest.
Yeah.
How uncreative of you.
No, it's like, I have seen very, very, like, normal things that you would have in nearly every story be referred to as tropes at this point, and it's just
sure.
Like, it doesn't matter if you use tropes. Like people are actively harming their own works by, and this is my psychological evaluation from having observed people talk on Twitter. But there are people who are writing stories and who will jump on Twitter in the middle of their writing when they should be writing instead of thinking of stupid things to ask like this, and they'll be like, I don't know if I should put this in my story because it's such a trope these days.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you writing a story that's good?
Are you going to do something interesting with it?
Because if you don't think it's good, then maybe you shouldn't put it in the story. That's all
Sure.
the advice I can give you. But if you think it's good, why does it matter if it's something that's in other people's stories?
This is one of those things where the desire to call everything a trope and the eternal push of postmodernism always, they come to the point of making it impossible to actually write anything. Where it's like, where it's like, well, you can't write anything that's a trope, and everything is a trope. Therefore, you can only write nothing.
And therefore, Brian the dog from Family Guy's 50 empty pages in the middle of his book is, I guess, legitimate now. So
Yeah. Just consume. Consume new product.
Oh, absolutely. As long as that product is ice cream.
No. They want you to consume their intellectual properties.
What intellectual?
And pay lots of memory.
Oh, you're
pay
using
lots
IP
of money for them.
You're using IP in the legal sense, not in the actual intelligence sense.
Correct.
All right, so what good guys have they turned bad guy? Without naming Star Wars, Doctor Who, Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the Star Wars thing is the one that's most obvious to me. It's like, okay, here's our pitch. It's you know those pitch, what do they call them,
the pitch meeting guy?
Yeah, the pitch meeting videos. You can almost imagine him standing up and saying, "All right, new idea, Star Wars, except the Jedi are the bad guys." And it's like, well, how are you going to do that? Well, they're going to control all the Force, and they're going to be about controlling everyone who uses the Force. And they'd be like, but they don't do that in any of the previous movies or shows. Like they're actually pretty open to letting people who are Force users. You know, they say that they're not going to train Anakin because he's too old, and they let, what's his name, I think General Grievous left the Jedi Order or something like that, right?
I believe so. It's been a long time since I've seen those.
One of the bad guy generals in one of the prequels was like someone who had previously been part of the Jedi Order and left after being trained. So it's like, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of I mean, and I guess you could like chalk it up to like it being like a phase of like the smart way to do this would be to chalk it up to it being like a phase of their organization that they fell into and got out of. But that's not actually how any of these current writers do that kind of thing. There's like, now they're evil, blah, and there's no like, there's no the whole whatever they're creating sits in complete disconnect with everything that came before it and everything that will come after it, except for that trope.
I'm not really sure that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, for starters, I have been out of the Star Wars loop since the.
Me too. I'm
The Last Jedi.
I'm kind of going off of what?
I have not learned much about.
I don't pay Disney any money at this point. I just watch people talking about their stuff and clips occasionally.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am.
And
so
that's more than enough for the quality of writing that they have these days.
Yeah, it's probably a bit too much, actually.
It is too much. It's like an anti-venom. It's diluted toxin.
And I think that it's really just a matter of bad writers that think that the way to be a good writer is to take anything. It doesn't matter what it is, but just like anything from something previous that they didn't create and just turn it on its head, and that automatically makes it good in their mind. It's the only
either they're the kind of kid that breaks the toy and calls that the thing to do.
The toy is better now.
I broke it.
But no, that kind of does seem to be the consistent thing in the modern world of writing, be it Hollywood or books or whatever.
Yeah.
You have the thing, and especially in the case of Hollywood, like none of those people created any of those properties. None of them have the imagination to create something new. And so they get handed solid gold on a silver platter.
Well, solid gold might be an exaggeration, but something decent.
In terms of the money that they should have been able to make with the things they were given solid gold.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, this is like, imagine
they were given a goose that has gold diarrhea.
Yeah, imagine that someone gives you a spindle that can spin straw into gold, but then they also give you the straw, but the straw is already gold. That's basically where they were at when they started.
But Justin, Rumpelstiltskin is such a cliche.
And a trope. It's actually, of all of them you can name, that is one of the least cliche ones I can think of, because how many times have you really seen Rumpelstiltskin, that story, like
done better,
or even copied?
Yeah.
maybe like maybe relatively
it's amazing,
or metaphorically.
But like Rapunzel has more remakes than Rumpelstiltskin.
Yeah, it does.
Which is horrifying.
But Rumpelstiltskin, the Rumpelstiltskin analogy is just like, you have an entire group of people that created nothing and never proved themselves, and then someone says, here's the gold, make a suit out of it. And they take it and they kind of just like bang the straw together and maybe bite it a few times, and then they crumple it up and throw it on the ground and say, there it is, my life's work.
Pay me.
And then nobody buys it, and so all the people that didn't buy it...
The first couple of times it happens, tons of people buy it. And that's part of the problem.
Well, I don't think anyone views that as... Well, they view it as part of the problem, but the people that are buying it do not. They're like, oh no, they just can't... They can't make good things anymore. Which, by the way, I haven't watched it yet. I don't really think I'm planning to. Mm-hmm. But they did finally release the Netflix version of The Three Body Problem, which I've already heard is a bit of an atrocity, and that's compared to the book, which I consider an atrocity.
Are you surprised? Or
no, I'm not.
I'm not surprised.
I'm just okay. So I'm preloading something we may talk about in the future.
I'm down with that.
I don't know if I can actually bring myself to watch it though, because the book was so incredibly bad.
Actually, if we're gonna do a live episode next week, if we find enough time, we might be able to watch The Three Body Problem and then discuss it.
It's episodic though, so I don't think we'd be able to watch the whole thing. How many
episodes are there?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Can we just do one of them?
That would work. We could do one and be like, all right, here's how bad it got.
Here's how bad this first episode was. And here's our idea of how much worse it's going to get.
Yeah. So getting somewhat back to the thing we haven't actually talked about yet. Yeah. We have...
Well, we did. We mentioned the Jedi.
Yeah. So we have... what is that new show? The Acolyte?
Yes.
I don't really know anything about it, but for the bits and pieces I've seen in clips where people said that at the end of it, really the Jedi were justified in what they did, but they were called the bad guys. That was the message you were...
That's what the people who are watching it are saying, who are like rational or thinking rationally. That's not what... I don't think that's what the show creators intended.
No, that's how it goes a lot of times today. They actually think... Yeah, they actually think that what they created looks like... makes it out that... In this case, the Jedi are supposed to... The takeaway is supposed to be that the Jedis are a bad guy. Yeah. And anyone who watches it and actually has any sense of morality or honor looks at it and says, no, they're the good guys here. Yeah, now, I don't know what the specifics are in that case, but we've seen this happen before.
Yeah.
Like with Doctor Who, we saw... there was the episode where the Doctor blew someone up when she could have saved him. And there were like 3 or 4 instances where it's just like, no, you didn't have to do that. And it wasn't even in a character development way. Like, they had that moment in that special with the giant spider that was going to unleash her spider children from the center of the earth. And the Doctor gave her a chance and said, if you don't stop, I'll stop you. She didn't stop, and so he basically flooded this cavern and killed all of her children. And you could see the anguish in the spider's face as this happened. And then she was destroyed too. Mm-hmm. And that was supposed to be a dark moment for that character. Right. Wherein, he'd been traveling alone for a while, whereas he usually travels with someone. And so the character that was introduced in that episode, Donna Noble, she actually tells him that he really needs to find someone to travel with because it's good for him.
He needs the companion,
Like she didn't like that dark part of him that she saw when that happened. But that wasn't what happened when, there was this episode that was a metaphor for Amazon and, down with corporations and everything. And there was a mad bomber that was blowing people up. And at the very end of it, the Doctor blows up the bomber, even though she could have saved him. He gets a package of his own through his own, hoisted by his own petard. He basically gets a package that's going to blow him up. And the Doctor could save him and just doesn't. And that's not very heroic, and that's not very... There's nothing honorable in what she did, even though she's not obligated to save him. You're watching a show that's supposed to be about someone who is a hero.
That's the purpose of the Doctor, is to save who can be saved.
Yeah, and the Doctor does give people chances, but there was no...
I didn't watch that much Doctor Who, but in general, the tone was supposed to be, optimistic with a few road bumps.
Doctor Who is a superhero story with the veneer of sci-fi.
Right. A very thin veneer of sci-fi.
Yeah. So I imagine from what I heard about the Acolyte that everything played out in a similar way. Like I remember hearing one reviewer talking about how the character that you're supposed to view as the good guy is actually the reason everyone burned to death. She locked out the heroes and locked all of her family in this room where they ended up burning to death, and then she blamed the heroes.
Yeah.
And it's funny that a lot of the times that happens, it's someone trying to not take responsibility for things, because we've seen the type of people that make up the majority of Hollywood and television these days, and they don't take much responsibility for their mistakes.
Well,
especially
they don't have to. Think about it this way, right? Star Wars, first 3 movies, George Lucas, not in complete control, but in fairly solid control of all 3 movies, right? Then a bunch of time passes, the prequels, George Lucas in even more control of the prequels, and that has some major negative effects as well. Then we have the sequels, where they give Star Wars to a known idiot who creates mystery boxes. The idiot creates mystery boxes, and then they take it away from him and give it to a person who likes to create endings for the second film in a trilogy. He ends all the mystery boxes without opening any of them, and then they give it back to the mystery box guy. Mystery box guy proceeds to invalidate the original trilogy.
Like, it's such a train wreck.
It really is such a train wreck when you think about it that way, right? Like they gave, you could have given, if you wanted to end the trilogy, well, the time to end the trilogy is in the 3rd movie, not the 2nd movie. When the guy making the 2nd movie is like, I'm going to end everything, someone should have been like, no, you're not. And if you continue to persist in trying to end everything for the 2nd movie in a trilogy, then we're going to put someone else in your position.
I mean, it's not that I want to say these people are completely talentless. It's just that we used to get the quality of writer that could crank out a movie every year and not know what the second one was going to be or what the third one was going to be. And they could make a line of movies that didn't even have to... Well, that's the thing,
is it stayed in the hands of one person. Instead,
helps.
What everyone does now is every property gets thrown to some rando, and that rando wants to put their mark on it, and they do, and the mark is usually awful. And then for the next thing, it's not like... Then none of the things are as successful as the companies want them to be. And so then what happens next is they throw it to a different rando who wants to put his mark on it. And that seems to be Star Wars seems to be mired in that death spiral. It's just a bunch of no talent hacks putting their own particular stamp on the Star Wars universe until the whole thing collapses under the own weight of its contradictions.
It's a very egotistical thing, and it's the thing that is largely responsible for ruining... I have a great example for anyone out there that wants to do some deep diving on how someone's ego can ruin something.
Okay.
You go out and you look up the events that transpired over the Amico system that was supposed to be released as the successor to the Intellivision by Tommy Tallarico.
Okay.
There is a case in point where a guy's ego was so big and it was so important to him to make his mark somewhere that he absolutely destroyed his own project, if it was ever even going to get off the ground to begin with, because after seeing everything that unfolded in that case, I was convinced that he was just trying to turn himself into the CEO of something, get a lot of venture capital, pay himself a big payout, and then let the project fail to begin. I think that was his plan to begin with. I couldn't prove that.
Tallarico was Remind me who Tommy Tallarico is?
He basically did some music for video games in the 90s. Earthworm Jim soundtrack was... this is the best part about that.
Mm-hmm.
After the events that happened over the Amico and all the legal troubles that are now ensuing...
I'm confused about this because the Amico sounds like it would have been in the works nearly 2 decades after the Intellivision was dead.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, even more so.
Oh. Okay.
I think it was largely Tommy Tallarico's idea to release this sort of not next gen, but not completely retro system. It was kind of like breathing new life into the Intellivision brand was
Yeah.
the concept. And they were going to do new games. They were going to make games based off of the old properties. This guy goes out there and he gets a bunch of people on board, gets a few investors, and he starts
Yeah.
talking about how, oh, we're going to have the next Earthworm Jim game. And the Earthworm Jim people are like, we never said that. And then he's like, well, we're going to have a new Toe Jam and Earl game. And the Toe Jam and Earl people are like, no, that wasn't the deal. No. And he just kept doing this over and over again. He kept lying to people about what they were going to, he didn't have even a prototype in the several years that this went on. They didn't even develop a prototype for this thing.
Which is amazing because what was that thing called? Was it called the Phantom?
Phantom
had a prototype, didn't it?
I mean, there was a box. I don't know if it was an actual prototype.
There was a box made of plastic that was claimed to contain video game materials.
Yes. But, this guy's ego was so big that he actually started taking pot shots at Nintendo and how, Nintendo is the console you go to if you want, they've lost their way and they've got games on there that children shouldn't play now and we're not going to be like that. And a lot of people agreed that his head is just stuck in the 1990s and the things he's saying are not good ideas. He got hung up on these controller designs he wanted to make for this system.
Uh-huh.
And he just wouldn't let things go. And it was, if you watch the videos of him trying to promote this stuff, it's so obnoxious. And I don't like the word cringe, but this is the absolute cringiest stuff I ever saw. Culminating probably in a video where he was on a live stream with someone. And he was talking about, he was trying to appeal to the nostalgia of the retro people.
Okay.
And he says, just remember he tells the guy, close your eyes. Okay, now just picture the NES controller in your hand. Picture how that felt and remember what it was. And then he holds up this rectangle on the screen and says, now open your eyes. And the guy opens his eyes. And you can see when the guy looks that he's like, he doesn't quite understand what he's supposed to be reacting to, because this thing is literally just like a square, maybe touchscreen thing. It's not even turned on, so you don't even know what it's doing. It's just a square, and it's just like, okay, so your pitch here,
square of plastic, really?
Yeah. Your pitch here is because that is also rectangular shaped. I should be reminded of the NES controller.
Rectangles.
Yes. And it was really bad. Like we can stop talking about this now, but just take the deep dive and see how many things he lied about and how bad it was. And then the best thing that came out of it was people started looking into some of the lies he'd said about this. And then they were like, well, what else was this guy lying about? They went back through this guy's entire history, and he may not have even been the person who actually did the music for Earthworm Jim. That's how bad it got.
Wow.
Tommy Tallarico may have actually done practically nothing in the video game industry. With the exception, the one thing that nobody can take away from him, he did do those video game concerts. But people are seriously not sure if he actually made the entire or if he did as much work on the Earthworm Jim soundtrack as he claimed, because people were digging up credits that he was given credit for things that other people had done in other video games.
Oh, that's kind of weird.
I just, if you want a good laugh and if you want to be like, there's human beings like this and it hurts just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look up what happened with the Amico.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
So 24 minutes in this
video. Where it belongs.
Yeah, 24 minutes into this video, we should point out that we're just doing a Talkin bout, so we're going to be all over the place.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. I mean, I'm sure we can talk more about the turning the good guys evil trope. Like, one example I think is Fallout, right? Like, Vault-Tec in Fallout 1 and 2 is not good, but they're not, like, insane psychopaths. But then Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 come around, and everything was this plan by Vault-Tec. And Vault-Tec just had all the craziest people doing all the craziest things, and they had all these bizarre experiments. And certainly there were bizarre experiments in the lore for Fallout 1 and 2, but I feel like they just stepped it way up when they went to 3 and 4, which, not coincidentally, is when Fallout turned from, a isometric CRPG to a first-person thingamajig created by Bethesda.
Yeah, that's not
right?
particularly surprising. I mean, I've never played through a Fallout game, so I don't exactly know everything.
I mean, I've played through the first one a couple of times, and I've played a few hours of the second one, and I've played a bit of the third one and a bit of the fourth one. I never played Fallout 76, and I never played... There was a Brotherhood of Steel, like, real-time strategy game. I never played that either, but I assume that it didn't have a whole lot of lore in it. But, like, it's one of those things where it became really easy to... Oh, and I've played some New Vegas. It became really easy to just turn this organization into the enemy of all mankind when, they were unethical but not like insane before. And it just seems like it's just so easy, It's like, oh, well, we're going to take this group and we're just going to dial that evil up to 11. I mean, I feel like you could do things more interesting than that. Like the stories from after Fallout 2 never really engaged me that much. It was more like, let's shoot these guys, and that's moderately fun until I realized that it really wasn't.
Yeah, it sounds to me like what happened there is it's just... You're right about the easy part. It's easier to just say, all right, we can just make all the problems the fault of this one entity.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to write any new story. We don't have to create some kind of conflict anywhere besides here.
We don't have to create any nuance anywhere. Whenever anything bad happens, we dump it over here, and you end up with this mountain of bad stuff all attributed to one group. And, there's just not that much interesting about that because it's just like... I mean, like, you can do the crazy, evil, mad scientist doing evil things for no reason because he's crazy. But, like, that's a trope too, and that needs to be considered. And it's way more satisfying to the reader, to the player, to whatever, to actually have like a question in their head as to like, oh, were these guys really all that bad? Right? That was the whole point of a lot of what happened in Fallout 1 is that there were a bunch of, bad organizations that did bad things, but like, they weren't all like 100% diabolical evil. They had motivations that were not 100% evil, but had, required evil means or something like that. Whereas then eventually you just dump everything onto this corpse, and you just blame the corpse.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've always been a pretty big good versus evil person. I don't mind the black and white stuff, but especially in a game like Fallout where you're immersing yourself into something, you do want to paint a picture of a world where people do have different motivations for things,
right,
and different ideas of morality. Because if you had a world where, unless you're writing a dystopian story, it works well for a dystopian story to have like, this is our set of morals, and maybe there's like one other group that has a different set, and that's where the conflict is.
Sure.
It would work great there, but when you want the player to immerse themselves in a world, you want a variety of characters. And I think this was one of the reasons that, people seem to like Baldur's Gate 3 a lot. I heard from a few people...
It was extremely well received. I haven't played it.
I've played it, but I played it before the big update, before it became like an official release. And it seemed like just a straight Dungeons & Dragons campaign up until that point. And I remember watching someone talking about how when they were, they so proudly announced how they were having all these different, you can court anyone, basically. And this guy reviewed it and said, yeah, well, I mean, they say that, but there's no real story here. Like, you don't get to know someone, and you don't get to really have any kind of adventure.
So they did that same thing in Baldur's Gate 1 when they did the enhanced edition. They just put like a romance arc, and romance is in hard scare quotes, where like you have like 3 conversations with a person, and then it's like that's it kind of thing. It's very simplistic and not very satisfying. Like even from what it's trying to be, it's just like, okay, there were 4 paragraphs of text that I clicked on. It doesn't give them, well, maybe it does give them a bonus or something. I don't remember, but like it didn't really have any effect on the gameplay, and it didn't have any effect on the greater world as far as I could tell.
Yeah, that seemed to be the complaint for what they did in Baldur's Gate 3, where it largely consisted of characters would just come up to you and like be really pushy about commencing the bangin', and then you'd get a button that says go ahead and commence the bangin', and that was the extent of it.
Tap the X button repeatedly to bang.
Yeah. It's a quick time event. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know too many examples of the good guys becoming bad, because usually by the time stories and movies get to that point, I've checked out.
That's fair.
I'm trying to think of an example from a book, and I can't come up with one.
Well, like, didn't the Rings of Power do that? Where, like, they played off this new character as a good guy, and, you know, he's like kind of morally gray, but pretty decently good, and it's like, oh, that's Sauron.
I don't know. I haven't seen the Rings of Power.
I haven't seen it either, but that's what I understand.
That's actually hilarious.
Yeah. And everybody else was like, that's going to be Sauron. That's totally Sauron. They're trying to make us think that he's not Sauron by making him not like Sauron, but that's Sauron.
You know, I can think of times where it's worked to hilarious effect. Like,
sure.
You know, we can take a case of there was an animated special for the Slayers.
Okay.
Now here's the problem. Here's the quandary we have. Lena Inverse and Naga the Serpent are essentially a little bit morally gray. They're largely good guys.
They're quite morally gray.
Yeah, they are not like Lena will off bandits who get in her way.
Lena robs from the rich and gives to herself.
Yes, that's actually probably the best way to describe her.
Yeah.
Well, she will rob from the bandits and give to herself, and she will fool the rich out of their money if she can.
Sure.
But
the bandits are the rich in this case, yes, but
yeah, she does destroy a lot of things that she probably shouldn't destroy.
Also true, yes.
Naga the Serpent might be a touch more evil than Lena when it comes to it, but even she is just she's for hire. She's basically a mercenary.
Yeah, so she's not an indiscriminate murderer. She's
so her morality is largely based on who's paying her.
Right.
And they did an episode where the idea was that, you know, they're both powerful sorceresses, so this guy finds a mirror that can copy people and turn them into the opposite of themselves. And in his head, Lena and Naga are powerful sorceresses that are on the side of good, and he needs some minions that are on the side of evil. Okay. So he uses this mirror to duplicate them. And the immediate result is these two cowering, crying girls that are too afraid to do everything because they also have the exact opposite levels of confidence and headstrongness that Lena and Naga both have.
See, that's a good way to do that. That's clever and fun.
And they actually are more evil than Lena and Naga, but they're completely crippled by their inability to take any action.
Right.
But you know, as far as stories that just take the good guys and make them bad, I know I've seen maybe not some
good guys, but maybe like morally neutral or
like the hero of a story previous becomes the bad guy is kind of what we're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Like
maybe well, I mean, my example was Vault. My example were the Jedi and Vault-Tec, which are not like, you know, 100% morally good organizations. Obviously, Vault-Tec way worse than the prequel and original trilogy sequel or Jedi, but at the same time, it just seems to me like this is a really lazy writing technique, and I thought it would be worth spending a little time looking into it and see if we could come up with any other examples. I mean,
well, go ahead.
Is there anything in I don't know. I mean, there's I don't know.
I can think of one example.
Okay, you got one example.
I can think of a good example of this again.
Go.
Because I watch good stuff and not Star Wars.
Okay.
I'm not so sure this counts as a good guy turning evil, though, but you do have stories where people are secretive about what they're really doing.
Sure.
And then it's revealed later that they were operating under false premises or evil plans, things like that.
Sure.
And one case that might segue into another topic we may be able to discuss for a minute here is Professor Leskinen from Steins Gate Zero, who is portrayed at the beginning of the story as nothing but a scientist who's trying to develop an artificial intelligence system that can back up human memories and make them more lifelike because they're based on real people. And you are strung along in this story for a long time thinking that he's just background to the events that are really happening, only to find out that he has knowledge of the future because a character from the future... This is a time travel story, so there's stuff happening all over past and present.
Yeah.
A character from the future was sent to the past by his future self and brainwashed to give him the information he needs in order to capture a time machine in the past and take over time travel permanently and set himself up as like a god of time.
Okay.
Which is that's revealed as his motivation. And up until that time, he's one of the most innocent and happy and friendly characters in the story, but it turns out that the people that he's meeting and being friendly with, and he meets the main character, and you find out later he knew who a lot of these people were, and he was manipulating them to try and set up his plan to go off without a hitch.
Yeah.
So there's an example of... I mean, it's possible that, and this is just conjecture, of course, but it's possible that before he had that information, he was a good guy, and he was just doing research for the sake of doing research. And then he receives information from his future self, and because his future self was evil, it sparked that earlier in him, and he became evil, seeing his opportunity to capitalize on something. So you might be able to make the case that maybe he started as a good guy, but if he was always going to end up as a bad guy in the future, it's not a stretch to say that receiving certain information would make him a bad guy in the past.
Yeah.
As far as an actual good guy character...
Well, what about, didn't they do that to John Connor in one of the horrible Terminator sequels?
Yes, but that's one that can be explained by the machines turning John Connor into a bad guy. It was a horrible movie, by the way.
I saw part of it, and I haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah, the only Terminator movie I didn't watch was the very last one, because after... I don't remember what it was called, but after the Terminator where John Connor is the bad guy, I checked out of that franchise.
Sure.
And I was pretty lenient to begin with, because I gave Terminator Salvation a lot more credit than it might have been due, just because I thought they kind of had a good idea going, but it just wasn't Terminator, so I was like, okay, I mean, this is fine.
That's fair. So I guess, okay, so at this point we've kind of gone through a couple of examples where this is done poorly, and an example where this is done kind of neutrally, and an example where it's done fairly well. So I think it's a reasonable time to switch over to your dyslexic view of this idea, and let's talk about evil guys turning good.
Yeah, now this, I can think of a ton more examples because I watch anime.
Yeah, it's a shonen manga staple.
Yeah, basically, nearly everybody that Goku fights throughout the entirety of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z becomes a good guy. The only notable exceptions originally were Cell and Frieza, but even Frieza, when they relaunched Dragon Ball as Dragon Ball Super, sort of became a good guy. In his case, it was kind of interesting because he joins the good guys to help them fight in a tournament where the universe itself is threatened, and that would be bad for him too.
Yeah.
And he still has evil motivations. They even have a movie where he does try to kill them after he's kind of joined the good guys, and he tries to kill Goku and Vegeta by bringing back Broly from the old movies and having them fight. He definitely still wants to rule the universe. But as time goes on in Dragon Ball Super, it does finally get to a point where, and I haven't seen much of this, I don't know all the details, but I saw enough of it to know that he's he's dead. And in Dragon Ball, being dead just means you have a halo over your head. So he's still fighting in this tournament with them. And one of his reasons for agreeing to help them fight in the tournament was that they would use the
Dragon Balls?
Yeah, they would use the Dragon Balls to bring him back to life. That was his stipulation, which they did at the end of it. So, or they did something to bring him back to life. It wasn't the Dragon Balls, but so he gets that at the end, and then it's still ongoing. I don't know anything that happened after that, but I'm assuming that as time goes on, he'll probably end up going more and more good guy. So this is definitely a staple of things like that, and this was true in like Rurouni Kenshin. Bad guys would become good guys. You know,
Yeah.
Dragon Ball is the classic example because it was pretty much
it is
every
a
bad
shonen
guy.
manga staple. You will find this in like boxing manga. You will find this in fantasy manga. This is there's that Magic and Muscles show
Yeah.
where that happens several times.
And it's usually done pretty well. Like they do it with a glimpse at each character's motivations for why they were evil to begin with.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find out, oh, they weren't really evil, or oh, there was a misunderstanding, or they were doing it for good purposes.
Sure.
I think one of the most interesting ones is probably the case of, well, actually, Dragon Ball Z has two really good ones. In the case of Piccolo, he's the big bad guy at the end of the original Dragon Ball series.
Right.
And going into Dragon Ball Z, he was still kind of a bad guy, but the events that happened at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z lead him into saving the world against another bad guy, one of the only ones that dies and never comes back as a good guy.
Yeah.
And then because of the events that unfold there, they realize there's even more powerful bad guys that are going to show up, and so he pretty much kidnaps Goku's kid and decides to train him because he's probably the only hope they have.
Right.
And so over the course of him training this kid and then having to fight together with all the other good guys to fight off this new threat, he eventually just becomes one of the good guys.
Yeah.
And following that story, you have Vegeta, who comes to Earth to kill off everyone, and he's going to destroy the Earth. And after that happens and he is defeated by Goku, he returns to Frieza, who is the new threat, and
The new bad guy, yeah.
His motivation is to become more powerful than Frieza. So he's trying to gather the bigger Dragon Balls on a different planet, and he's going to use them to unlock the ability to become a Super Saiyan and defeat Frieza. And he's a bad guy this whole time until when Goku finally shows up and defeats Frieza, that sort of starts Vegeta's journey into becoming a good guy. But the entire time up to them, everything is just selfish motivation. He's only allied with Goku's son and friend for the purposes of getting his own way, getting the Dragon Balls. And he's manipulating them this entire time. They know he is, but they also know he's right. In a sense, because he's trying to convince them to help him find the Dragon Balls and become the Super Saiyan, because he's the only hope they have of beating Frieza at that moment.
Right.
So everything he's doing is just so that he can replace Frieza and become the new Frieza. And then after that happens, he has this kind of a slow burn of character development where he sticks around with the good guys. He can't. His new motivation becomes that, now Goku has beaten him once, and he's beaten the enemy that Vegeta couldn't beat. So Vegeta loses a lot of his evil streak to the idea that really what he wants to do is be able to beat Goku. That is his motivation for almost the rest of Dragon Ball Z at that point. And so all the evil and blowing things up and killing people kind of disappears over time.
There's no motivation for him to do it anymore because he's not working for Frieza anymore either.
Yeah. And it just, everything kind of, his was very interesting just because how long it took for it to happen. And, this is just one show we're talking about, but like, what are some others? So like you said, it's a lot of shonen shows.
Well, I'm thinking about like, gosh, I wish I had prepared more for this.
Hey, we're talking about stuff. It's okay. I have an entire book about characters like this. I'm ready to go.
That's true. I'm thinking of like if there was a.
Should I just start naming some shonen anime?
Sure, go for it.
There was Bleach. There was My Hero Academia.
Okay, Bleach is a good example. Academia, not so much because they were there's a little bit of mixing between the heroes and villains, but the heroes are heroes and the villains are villains. At least as far as I saw.
Probably the most interesting one in My Hero Academia was the basic one at the beginning where, technically the two characters that were butting heads at the beginning were kind of like a good versus evil, where the one was a bit of a bully. But over time, he just became more of... Because he was in school to be a hero, but he was bullying people that weren't quite as good as him.
Okay, yeah. Let me give you an example of where this trope doesn't appear and is done effectively. One Punch Man.
Yes, that's actually a really good one.
Because One Punch Man is a is I mean, it kind of happens, but then it kind of doesn't. It's very weird, right? Because like most of the enemies that One Punch Man fights, he just hits them and they explode into a spray of guts. The people that doesn't happen to are usually other heroes that he gets into, that they like make some kind of misunderstanding about who he is or what he's doing, and they kind of try to stop him and discover that they cannot stop him. You know, I remember, what's her name? Fubuki. She's fighting with him in one scene, and then like the next freaking scene, he like walks into his apartment and she's sitting there eating Fritos. Like, it was quite hilarious.
Yeah, One Punch Man has some of my favorite moments in any hero setting ever. Now there are actually a few.
Well,
cases.
it's another show that took a trope and played around with it in a unique way.
Yeah, nobody does that as well as the Japanese anymore. Anime is kind of like got that. They've got that down to a science where they'll take a common idea and they'll just improve upon. I mean, Mashal, Muscles versus Magic, is pretty much a parody of Harry Potter, except Harry Potter is a musclehead who can't use magic, but can still beat anyone that uses magic. There is a character in the One Punch Man comic. I have not read this, but I caught it on a YouTube short the other day. Do you remember the mosquito at the beginning of the show that he swats away and just...
Yes.
Yeah, so apparently later on in the comic, it's revealed that she didn't actually die, and the reason there was all that blood was because her blood sac as a giant mosquito exploded, but she somehow survived, and she's actually working as a waitress in a couple of the panels later in the comic. So,
that's wonderful.
So she kind of like reformed by threat of, I don't want that to happen again, so we'll just do this now. We'll just be a waitress now. Yeah, let's see. What are there's a ton of shonen shows that do that.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, like, staple is the right word. It's really, because what happens in a shonen manga is that it goes on indefinitely, right? And so, like, as long as it's popular, it's got to continue. And the creator creates a bunch of really cool characters that are bad guys, and like just killing those characters off is a really bad idea for keeping your comic popular, right? Because you win a bunch of new readers whenever you create a really cool character. And having them go from villain to dead is better for your readership is not as good for your readership as having them go from villain to reluctant hero.
Yeah, it helps in the sense that, I mean, if you have a character that you've created that is really, really cool, and you know people are thinking, oh, this character is really, really cool.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make much sense to get rid of them when they can be used for something down the road. And it's not hard to incorporate into your writing. Like, let's say hypothetically you decide on a whim that a character that you were going to kill off, you're just going to make one of the good guys.
Yeah.
Down the road, you will probably run into a situation where, oh, this character is actually useful for this, or it'll spark an idea that can fill in and flesh out more of the story. Because if you just have a hero who keeps I'm going to go here and take care of all the problems, and I'm going to go here and take care of all the problems, and I'm going to go here, and there's nothing else to it, it becomes kind of it becomes a little dry. Like all of the tension and drama in One Punch Man is the build up to when Saitama actually appears to stop the bad guy.
Right.
That first major villain that comes crawling out of the undersea world to take over the surface. All of the fun of that storyline is all of the characters that show up to try and stop him and can't.
First.
And all the characters that delay him just long enough so that Saitama can finally show up.
Right.
And there's... The writer of that particular comic really understands how to pump up an audience, because it usually doesn't end with Saitama beating the bad guy. There's usually one other thing to it that really, really, like, it makes you just sit back and say, oh yeah, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
You had all these people that were going to be killed by this villain, and all these powerful heroes show up and get beaten. And then a not very powerful hero shows up. The final hero to delay this monster has no real powers, can't really stop the villain, but fights him anyway. And the villain just kind of toys with him and keeps injuring him and laughing at him.
Yeah.
But it holds him off just long enough to where Saitama shows up.
Yeah.
Who utterly destroys the villain with, as you might guess, one punch.
Right.
And then after that, you have all of the people that were watching everything play out and all the people whose lives were threatened and who were just saved by this guy. Their immediate reaction was not to cheer on the hero, which is the trope, actually. This is turning a trope on its head. Their reaction was, that guy's only a C-ranked hero. Why did all these A-rank heroes have so much trouble? And Saitama is shown listening to people whispering these things, and he's got a really dark expression. He's not happy with what he's hearing. And so he kind of turns around and in a really loud voice says, "Oh, thank God all these great heroes wore him down enough to where I could beat him." And then he just sort of leaves, and one of the heroes who is his friend says, "Are you sure this is how you want it to go down?" And he's like, "Yeah, this is how it should be."
Yeah.
So it's like he didn't just show up and beat the bad guy and save everyone. He has this sort of integrity that really makes you cheer for him.
Right.
And that's the mark of good writing, when you know what you need to do to get your audience to cheer for the hero instead of just being like, well, this hero is just beating the bad guy and that's all there is to him. It's kind of boring.
Right. To actually get that emotional engagement is important.
The character development.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was thinking, and finally I was like, oh wait, Apollo Creed in Rocky is a bad guy who goes good.
Yeah, that's a good example of one. And
I kept thinking of like boxing manga, and I'm like, boxing manga, Rocky. Oh, Rocky, yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, Ashita no Joe is actually a good example of the main character starts off as a bad guy, and boxing is what makes him a good guy.
Yeah.
It's kind of his method of reform.
Right.
So what else do we have? Do we have any sports anime or anything?
Well, in
any
sports
books
anime,
with...
it's pretty common. There's Ranma
1/2, which does it in a really interesting way, where no one is ever really on anyone's side in particular.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily evil.
Right.
Like Ranma fights Moose, who never stops fighting him, but they're also kind of hanging out as friends in certain episodes. He fights Ryoga, who is Ranma's biggest rival, probably. And they never stop squaring off, but when they need to help each other out with something, they do.
Yes. I was gonna say, shoot, it's gone. Crap. I had one, and it wasn't a manga. It was like actual. It was something non-Japanese, but now I lost it. It's gone.
Actually, Ranma 1/2 might be the premier characters butting heads story, because everyone, including Ranma, is a bad guy that becomes a good guy in one sense or another.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really any clear bad guyishness to most of the characters. The character Shampoo in Ranma 1/2. Now, she shows up, and her motivation, after she fights with Ranma and is beaten, her motivation is that, oh, well, I have to marry the person that beat me. So she kind of stays a bad guy throughout the whole thing, because she's always coming up with some plan to get Ranma to marry her. And it never quite works out, but it makes her simultaneously a bad guy, but also a friend of the family. So
yeah. She's a known quantity.
Yeah, it's very. That's the formula for Ranma 1/2. Everyone is kind of friends, but also kind of rivals or enemies or creepy stalkers. And I wouldn't have it any other way. There are people that look at these tropes and they don't like them. But we've named like 15 different ways for 3 different tropes to go. And
well, the important thing is not that you avoid the trope. The important thing is that you use the trope in a way that hasn't been used a million times, right? Like it's all about nuance with tropes, because like because if you get to the very bottom of it, right, like the hero's journey is a trope, but at the same time, good luck writing a story that doesn't have elements of the hero's journey in it.
Yeah, and furthermore, you've got to look at it in the sense that you're supposed to be growing something organically anyway. Like I don't think people set out to write a trope. I think that they write something that sounds like a good idea and it has elements of tropes in it, and therefore it fits the trope. But I don't think anyone sits down and says, "Oh, I'm going to."
No. But what people do is they sit down and they write something and then they say, "Oh, that's a trope. I got to get rid of it."
Yeah, those people are fools.
As opposed to, "Oh, that's a trope. How can I make my take on this trope unique?"
And you don't even necessarily need to make it unique as long as you do it
Not for
well.
everything, but for something that's a significant portion of the story, you might want to. Yeah.
What other good tropes do we have? Since we're talking about tropes, are there any you can think of that warrant any digging?
That's a. I think we've done an episode on tropes, haven't we?
I think we have. Okay, so I care so little about whether or not I'm using a trope or what tropes I'm using that I don't actually know what the definitive hero's journey trope is. I couldn't describe to you the hero's journey. I have a vague notion that I think I know what it is, but I don't care.
The thing is that the hero's journey is just a character who is not a hero grows into a hero through the trials and hardships and help from other characters that he got along the way. Like that's the hero's trope in a nutshell. That's the hero's journey in a nutshell.
Okay, that's
and there's a bunch of elements of it that people bandy about here and there. But like the point is that all it really describes is the growth of a character from something not notable to something that is notable, right? Like that's that, and you can put that in such vague terms that everything is part of that trope kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where if you have something that's a significant part of your story, and you realize that, and also what also happens is that everything that shows up in more than one story, in some kind of vague-ish form, gets classified as a trope and put up on like a website full of tropes. And it could be something that only shows up twice, and it's just like there's like. There could be like 3 links, but they come up with a name for it, and they put it on this website, and all of a sudden it's a trope. Well, I mean, if it's only been done by 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever people, in all that the internet can find, then maybe it's really not a trope. Maybe it's just something that you can classify as something relatable. I don't know.
I think it's too tropey to refer to things as tropes. I'm going to start referring to them as callback jokes.
Okay. Yeah, running gags?
Yeah. Well, I thought that was too tropey too, so callbacks.
Fair enough.
The point I kind of want to drive home is that you're not special if you break a trope. Your way of breaking a trope might be good, but it might also be trash, and you have to consider that.
Yeah.
Maybe you should just not focus on whether or not you have tropes and just writing something that someone would want to read.
Simple tropeness is not a killer of a story.
Yeah.
Is probably the point to take away from that.
I mean, I almost wonder if the reason that I can't find a lot of good books with heroes is because people are avoiding writing the hero's journey. So it's getting harder and harder to find books that I want to read. I love sci-fi. I love fantasy. I love stories about heroes that go up against a seemingly unstoppable nemesis.
I remembered the series that I was going to talk about bad guys becoming good guys. Raymond Feist, his what do you call it?
Thieves' World?
No.
Was that Raymond Feist?
His no, it wasn't. Well, maybe it was, but I don't know. But I'm talking about his Midkemia books. There's a lot of people changing sides in the Midkemia books. There's a whole book that's based on the events that transpire because a dark elf comes down and basically tries to get asylum, and it's like there's some bad stuff happening up north, and you need to deal with it, and all of the intricacies that go on with that. It's the good guys working with this dark elf named Gorath, and they try to fight off a larger evil that is also a threat to Gorath. And Gorath goes from being kind of a very rough, I hate humans kind of character to someone who is willing to go to quite an extent to save the world and people. You have, the character Jimmy the Hand was a thief, and he gets turned into, one of the kingdom's greatest heroes. There's a lot of switching characters from good to evil and back to good in those books, and they do a good job of it in general. The motivations remain interesting, and characters that you wouldn't think switched sides, end up switching sides, and characters that you think would switch sides often become, more like, what's the word? More steadfast than you would have expected. There's a lot of that in those books as well. So yeah, definitely a good example of that done well in a lot of cases.
Oh, I'll have to read more of his stuff. I knew I had a Raymond Feist book. It was Krondor the Betrayal is the book I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the game. There was a game called Betrayal at Krondor.
Yeah.
And basically what happened is the people that made the game wrote the story for the game, and then but Feist himself retained like the rights to write a story, a novel version of that story. And so he wrote that, and he wrote 2 sequels to that. And they're solid books. They're fun. His dialogue can be a little clumsy sometimes, but there's a lot of fun character stuff and a lot of good, like, intricate politics stuff that's a lot of fun to read.
Oh, I think I have a copy of Magician as well.
Magician's good. Well, Magician originally was 1 book, I think, and then it got split into 2, Magician Apprentice and Magician Master.
Yeah.
So I don't know which one of those 3 possibilities you have, but
I think
those are all good too.
I've got Apprentice, I'm pretty sure, because I've got a later reprint.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I have almost all my Feist stuff is paperback. So but he's good for paperbacks. They're chunky little paperbacks, and they take you a while to read, and they have some good stories.
Hey, are we setting up for a possible Raymond E. Feist episode?
We could if you want.
Yeah, I think I'll get to reading me some Raymond E. Feist.
All right, sounds good.
You know what? Now that I think about it, that whole Tommy Tallarico thing is kind of a story of someone who was perceived as a good guy turning bad.
Yeah. Well, it's like Nero Wolfe says, cliches become cliches by happening often.
Yeah. Cliches become cliches by becoming cliches by becoming cliches by becoming
cliches within cliches within cliches within
lie
cliches.
Upon lie upon lie upon lie.
That is a ancient something awful reference. If
kudos to anyone that gets that one.
Well, they'll get it now because I explained it, but
they haven't seen it yet.
No one's seen it. I can't find the file anymore.
Yeah, it's gone. I couldn't find it either. So we can't even link it in this episode.
I wish we could.
By we, I mean you, who does all the work for this.
Most of the work.
What work do I really do for this? I talk the same amount of time that you do.
And you talk. You talk more than I do for the most part.
So it depends on the topic.
Most of the topics you've talked more than I have.
When we do the physics topic, you will probably be taking the front seat.
That will be one episode of. I think we just released 34. So yeah.
Yeah. So
it's really funny when I open up both of our files into Audacity, and sometimes it's just like there's just this long ribbon of you talking and me with occasional little like blip 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 blip.
Well, like the Slayers one was expected. Obviously,
yes, some of these it's expected. I held my own in the Nero Wolfe ones, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, you would have been much more on top of it in the Nero Wolfe one because you've read those books more than I have.
Like a million times, yeah.
Yeah, it's
that's one genre where you don't see a lot of bad guys becoming good guys is Nero Wolfe because they all end up on the electric chair or dead.
Yeah, there was like the one recurring villain over 3 books that weren't published in simultaneous.
But he never becomes a good guy.
Yeah,
so
but that's about it. There's everyone's either the criminal or not. I still can't, because I went back and listened, and it was just like, I read that Trio for Blunt Instruments book the week that we did that.
Yep.
I could not remember what happened in the stories. I think that I have a lot more trouble remembering things like you know how I am. I read things that are very fantastical for the most part. Like I read a lot of
Yeah.
Terry Pratchett, things where a lot of weird things happen. Those are kind of my go-tos. And I love the Nero Wolfe books and I love mystery books, but
what about cases where the bad guys become good or vice versa in Pratchett?
ooh,
You have any good examples?
that's tricky because there's a lot of moral grayness
That's fair.
in Terry
That's fair.
Pratchett. Like the
But
patrician, for instance.
how about in Reaper Man? Death goes from being kind of morally gray to being distinctively good, and then back to being morally gray.
It depends on how you look at it, because Death is a character that evolved over time in the books, whereas he kind of just starts out as a joke character that shows up occasionally. Originally, he's just trying to follow Rincewind around and wondering when this guy's actually going to die, because he just seems to be... Rincewind has the quintessential plot armor. Like, he should be dead so many times, and it's not even because he's doing anything heroic that he's surviving. It's just like, everything around him is happenstance or people screwing up things that they should have done right, and so he survives.
Yeah.
And it's explained away a little bit in the sense that he has this powerful magic spell that is living in his head, and in ways it's protecting him. But after the second book, that spell's gone, so the explanation for that is just out the window. And you know, there's these great moments where Death will show up, and Rincewind might be hanging on a ledge or something, and Death will just be like, you could just let go. It wouldn't really, what does it really matter in the end? And Rincewind will have these funny conversations with him. And at one point, Death pulls out Rincewind's hourglass, and he's just staring at it. I think it was like the sand was going up for some reason, and Death is just like, come on.
Oh, come on.
But after that, Death is kind of in his own story with Mort, where he takes on an apprentice who ends up marrying Death's daughter. And in that book, him and Mort kind of have it out for a minute, where Death is slowly starting to...
Well, that's all after Reaper Man.
No, Mort is before Reaper Man.
Is he?
Yeah.
He's not mentioned in it at all.
Mort is... I think Mort is mentioned once in Reaper Man without his name, because he's brought up a couple of times in the books, but he's never actually mentioned by name after Mort. Even in The Hogfather, where Death's granddaughter, Susan, is talking about her parents, I think she refers to Death's daughter by her name, but she doesn't refer to her dad as Mort.
Okay.
Death kind of... After he takes on Mort as an apprentice, he kind of gets... He becomes interested in humanity. And it was the reason he had a daughter to begin with. I mean, his daughter is adopted. He adopted her from Earth because he was interested in people. And that kind of shapes the story that happens in Mort. And he takes on an assistant called Albert, who was a wizard that only had a few moments of time left and decided that he would go and serve Death instead of die.
Okay.
And then after he has all these interactions with people, in the later, like in Reaper Man, Death is shown to have this house where things are never really quite right, and it's like he has an idea of what it's like to be human, but he doesn't get it quite right, and everything is in black and white because that's how Death views the universe.
Yeah.
And he becomes a character who actually is a hero in later stories. They introduce these creatures that are called the auditors of the universe. And their motivation is that they start to believe that life just doesn't belong in the universe, and it makes everything disorderly, so they want to rid the universe of life. And Death is central in thwarting that.
Right.
So yeah, he starts off as a force of nature, essentially, and becomes a
character. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's not really... He does good things, but at the same time, he is aware that he has a job that has to be fulfilled.
No, I mean, he definitely reverts at the end of Reaper Man back to kind of his usual self. But like, I think the growth of him kind of learning what it's like to be human, kind of thing.
Yeah,
is a good example of kind of a force of nature becoming a good guy, and then but he does go back. But like, the point is that he does have that moment.
Yeah, and he does understand things a little better after that in the later books that he appears in. At the end of that book, he allows the death of rats to maintain its existence as a separate entity just because
Right.
He's been with humans for so long, and he's like, maybe I don't need to be alone doing this anymore.
Right.
I think maybe the patrician is a good example of a character that sort of went from bad to good, but it's not really good because the patrician's view is that the city needs to run, and sometimes you need to do bad things to run the city.
The patrician is just an interesting character, so like he's interesting because he's got so many layers, and he does good things for the city, and he does them in often underhanded or evil ways, but like that's kind of the beauty of the patrician as a character.
Yeah, he's playing a game of 10D chess at any given time, and he's a bit of a perfectionist in that sense. The one time that it seems like he might have messed something up is in Men-at-Arms, when he wonders if perhaps he pushed Captain Vimes a little too far and didn't quite manipulate him in the way he thought the way that he meant to.
Right.
I'm not so sure because that's a lot of characters. Like my favorite character is Granny Weatherwax.
Yeah.
And she's not necessarily a good character. She's usually always going to do the right thing, but she kind of...
No, I mean, I agree. She's not a good example of like evil turning good or good turning evil.
Yeah, because she's
just a character.
Yeah, she is.
I mean that
in
the most laudable possible way. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's not really any characters that...
I was just wondering about it because like I haven't read nearly as much Pratchett as you have, and I thought maybe he'd played around with that a little bit more. But Reaper Man came to mind as an example, albeit a mild one. But
the only concrete example...
Yeah.
The only concrete example I can think of is Moist von Lipwig.
Okay.
In going postal and making money, the patrician essentially sentences him to death. But being the patrician, he has other plans for people. So everyone sees Moist von Lipwig die.
Mm-hmm.
And he's hung in front of the city. But it turns out that he wasn't really hung. They kind of like let him drop out of sight in the gallows, and he's taken to the patrician, who says, you can start a new life as the postmaster general, and you can get the post office up and running. And if you do that, I will
not kill you.
You will not be sentenced to death. And originally, Moist's plan is, okay, I'm going to take this deal, but I'm going to find some way to get away from the city and everything. And so he does start out as a bad guy, and he did do bad things. And over the course of the story, he regrets the things he does. He meets people who change his thoughts on how things should be.
Perspective on things, yeah.
And originally, he's manipulating everyone around him, and then he still kind of manipulates people, but he's doing it for good reasons after that. He's doing what he needs to do to get people on his side so that he can stop a much bigger bad guy than himself. And then he becomes a good guy by the end of the story.
Indeed.
So that's probably the only concrete example off the top of my head.
That's all right. I just thought it would be worth bringing up since you're so familiar with all of Pratchett's stuff, and I'm less familiar, but yeah, Pratchett was a little bit more nuanced than that in general, so that's good. That's a good thing too.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I think that'll do it.
Yeah, we hit a lot of good stuff there, and
yes,
we managed to
talk
about it.
I had a little bit more time to like think of examples of this before we actually started the episode, but we did good enough.
I can recite to you all of the good guy.
Let's not do that.
Let's not do that.
That's not one episode for sure. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and for those of you on YouTube, thanks for watching. This has been the Wordy Pair Podcast, and as always, I'm Rudy,
and I'm Justin,
and we are out. See you next week. Have a good week.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.